gonna have our next panel, which is focused on documentary. So we're gonna have a conversation with Christine Turner, who made the amazing documentary Sun Ra Do the Impossible. Elaine Epstein, who is an honorable mention for our Creation Prize, who made the incredible documentary Arrest the Midwife. And Tia Lessin and Carl Deal, who made the incredible documentary about Amy Goodman called Steal This Story, Please. I was very struck by the fact that all three of these films are about individuals, and in the case of Arrest the Midwife, a community that shows incredible persistence and incredible vision in the face of great challenge. So I thought, and I also thought that not only are the subjects people of persistence and vision, but the filmmakers themselves demonstrate incredible persistence and vision. And so I thought, whichever way you want to think about answering that, I would love to hear each of you talk about how you think about persistence and what do you feel like was the core of the vision that you had for the film, or in the way that you wanted the vision of your subjects to come through. Hopefully that's not too complicated. Christine, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, thank you all for being here, and thank you for having us on this panel. I made a film called Sun Ra Do the Impossible, which is about, for those of you who don't know, Sun Ra was an avant-garde jazz musician, composer, poet. He led a big band for over 40 years called the Orchestra. And he claimed that he was teleported down from Saturn to deliver a message of peace to the world through his music. It's a big question that you're asking, and there's probably a couple of different ways to think about it. I mean, and he was a visionary in that, literally, like in that sense, but in so many different ways. I will say for a really long time, this is somebody that was not accepted, right, by the mainstream sort of jazz establishment. His music was really pushing the boundaries of what jazz was at the time. And so he was not embraced by that community, and very much in his time was sort of written off as this very kooky, outside the box person, sort of unserious. Some people thought of him as a charlatan. You go back and you look at his obituaries, and there were plenty of people who were not fans. And so for me, I was very much interested in reevaluating his life and legacy and really reframing him as a thinker, as somebody who was very much ahead of his time. And just to give you a little bit more background, the film, by the way, will be playing this afternoon at BAMPFA in Berkeley, for those of you who might be on the other side of the bay. This is somebody who was born in 1914 in segregated Birmingham, who died in 1993. So he lived a really long life. He was a very multifaceted person in that he had a tremendous output in terms of music, recorded, composed thousands of songs, wrote volumes of poetry, wrote broadsheets. So he just had a massive output. And then also held together a group of musicians over multiple decades, long after the big band tradition passed. But he really believed in this message of changing the world. And he was also a conscientious objector, which I think was a pretty unusual thing in his time, certainly for a Black man, somebody who was trying to, at that time, we were trying to prove our patriotism. So this was something that really indicated a kind of fearlessness on his part. So he had to overcome a lot to, get to where he was. He started a record label, one of the first artist-run independent record labels. This was back in 1957 in Chicago. He lived communally in a few different places all over the country with his band. This was an economic model, it was a creative model, it was a way to sustain the band over time. And he really believed in the power of myth and myth making and how that could reframe things or even, expand the frame for people, and really wanted to shake people up and shake them out of their complacency. So he saw it as a tool to sort of wake people up. And he thought that myth could be this powerful resource, I think, for Black people and for all people, really, to draw upon.
Well, and when you say myth, I mean, he's one of the progenitors of Afrofuturism.
Right.
And I think part of the mythic nature of his interests were to bust through the myth of racial inferiority,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. He thought, well, this country is founded on a myth. I'm going to create my own myth to counter that myth, And he believed that Black people had been stripped, specifically African Americans or those of the transatlantic slave trade had been stripped of their mythology. Mm-hmm. And this is something that he wanted to create. And so he was an incredibly well-read widely and deeply. All of these things, though, point back to the fact that here you have this person, right, whose project, in a sense, is there's an inherent tension with, us as filmmakers, as documentary filmmakers, where we're trying to sort of uncover a truth. And so he spent a lifetime of obscuring, his past and his history. And so, trying to, as a filmmaker, wrap your arms around his very large story, when you have someone who speaks in riddles and, is obscuring their past and is an unreliable kind of narrator is quite challenging. So I would say in the filmmaking itself, a big part of the persistence was like getting to the bottom of this and trying to, for someone who's obviously not here to tell their own story and who wasn't always the most consistent in his storytelling, try and understand what drove him and why he was able to do everything that he did do. But that was a fun challenge. He always said that the impossible, we've tried the impossible and failed, we need to try the impossible. And at times, that's how making this film would feel.
I love it. One of the things that I especially love about your film is that it was so inspiring. By the end of the film, I really felt like, yes, as artists, we need to keep going. It is like you were saying, Ellie, the following the core of our vision is the most important thing. And so I loved learning about who was the person behind Sun Ra, and I really loved feeling that power in your film.
Thank you.
Elaine, can you talk about persistence and vision in Arrest the Midwife?
Sure. So Arrest the Midwife is about the arrest of 3 home birth midwives serving the Amish and Mennonite communities in upstate New York. And they were arrested because their education is not recognized by the state of New York. But these are trained, educated midwives who are serving in an area where it's a health desert. We have a maternity healthcare crisis. So it really is about the stupidity of our healthcare system, really. But I think the key thing about this film is that it's about how these Amish and Mennonite women rally around their midwives and become activists for reproductive rights. And these are women who are not politically involved, who don't vote. And I think, given the crazy times that we're living in, it's just so inspiring to watch this community rise up and just in this very quiet and dedicated way fight for change. There's no, they're not very, there's no protest, so they just get down and do the work. And there's been so much work done around trying to get these midwives licensed in New York State, but it really took a group of Amish and Mennonite women to get the bill on the table. It's just I think in terms of persistence of vision in making this film, I mean, I knew I couldn't do it without the participation of the community, and these are, they do not like to appear on camera. It has to do with vanity. They don't like posing. It's not part of their culture or their religion. I'm also given a lot of credit for the access that I, managed to get to this community, but I always say their participation in the film was an extension of their activism. And so they really did welcome me in. And, I was saying I'm a very unlikely person to be allowed into this community. I'm gay, I'm Jewish, I'm South African. My crew was, I didn't choose my crew based on the community. My DP is like covered in tattoos. And then I was like, okay, well, I'll hire an AC and he's gonna be the one straight guy. and he arrived like the first day of shooting and he had his nails painted black. I was like, okay, like they were never gonna let us in. But they did, and we really bonded. I mean, my wife birthed both my children, but like through the process of our discovery of midwifery care, that's how I came to the story. And my son was born at home. And so we bonded over our shared beliefs around home birth. And I always say, like, it's, people don't, the Mennonite community, there's a lot of like negative perceptions of what that community is. And I don't agree with everything that the community stands for. And they certainly don't agree with everything that I stand for. But there is something beautiful to see their activism. And just in this age where we're so inundated with technology and we're all fighting to keep technology at bay, to see how they raise their children in this very natural, like we have something to learn. I think we dismiss other communities too quickly when we really have a lot to learn from each other. And I think that was, it was just one of the key drivers. I think the other thing is, like, I started this filming, I found the story and it was the arrest of one midwife, and I started filming, and I mean, the train just left the station. Like, I was like, I'll make a short. It'll be like, I've got some money. I'll put some money into this. It'll be okay. And then the story just kept going, and I was like, oh shit, like, now what do I do? Like, how am I gonna, and thankfully, ITVS came in, and I just want to say, like, they've an amazing partner, and it's really tragic what is happening to public television. So I'm just putting that out there as well. But yeah.
Talk about persistence, right? I mean, I think one of the remarkable things about your film is the way in which it's a film about reproductive rights, but from the opposite side. And it's, to see the persistence of the women fighting for what is right is really powerful. So thank you.
I always say just the one character in the film, Lisa, who's a Mennonite midwife, I mean, she should be running for president.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And for Tia and Carl, can you talk about Steal This Story, please, and the persistence and vision that you had in capturing Amy Goodman and her incredible work?
Absolutely. I first want to say, Christine, I look forward to seeing your film. It sounds extraordinary. And I saw your film at DC Docs, a wonderful, wonderful, traumatic story. And it occurred to me, because I just made a film, my last film was about the Janes, the underground abortion collective, and these pre-Roe abortion outlaws who were being criminalized for their work. These women that you're profiling are criminalized on the other end of birthing, and I thought, you can't win. We can't win. So we're just criminals. Speaking of criminals, so I came from making this film about this extraordinary collective of women, the Janes, and it was such a wonderful thing then to turn the camera on Amy Goodman, who embodies all those qualities that I just, excavated with these women who led this movement. And Amy, I've followed Amy over the years. I've been on her show. I've actually worked for a stint with her in 2000, and I just have been just an admirer of her. So I came at this film thinking, well, I don't want to fall out of love with this woman, because that's always the danger when you're making a film, a documentary film. But in fact, I grew to admire her even more. She's talk about persistence. 1996, she started this independent, listener-supported, audience-supported broadcast that doesn't take government money or corporate money, doesn't have underwriting, but relies on its listeners. And it's this truly unique model at that time. This was before Substack. This is before all these models that have proliferated now. And it happened to be the same year that Fox News came on the air, which was the polar opposite of her endeavor. And, she has grown that show from 9 community college radio stations, Pacifica Network and others, in 1996 to more than 1,500 today, more than PBS and NPR combined. And so a lot of the film is watching her take this very scrappy organization with volunteers and, cobbled together cameras and studios, and grow it into this state-of-the-art broadcast network, employing, dozens, and broadcasting not just everywhere in the country, but throughout the world. And not only that, but using the show and using her work to uplift community voices and public radio and public television, and all that they do, because she understands profoundly what it means, to hear the voices of people on the ground. And I guess early on she understood that is exactly what we weren't hearing from the commercial media, from the mainstream media. And so her job as a journalist, in her vision, and she'll talk about that later, but is to put the microphone, give the microphone to people whose voices you do not hear. Not only do you not hear them, but in many cases they're being purposely excluded, intentionally excluded. And so there's incredible persistence in that. I think if I were to think about one adjective to describe Amy, it would be unstoppable. And you'll see if you come to our film tomorrow at BAMPFA or on Monday at the Rafael, it is the opening scene will tell you everything you need to know about Amy Goodman. She is unstoppable, and also very funny, which I think is actually not at odds with who she is, but actually integrally a part of who she is. That when you're dealing with so much tragedy and seriousness, there's got to be some light, and she's certainly got a lot of that, and you'll see that yourself. And so we hope that comes through in the film. Let me let Carl jump in here and talk about the film and persistence.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I've got this incredible honor of working with Tia for the last 20 some years. We've produced a lot of films together, we've directed some films together, and I can honestly say that I'm guided by her persistence and vision throughout this whole process. I always learn so much. And so having Tia and Amy to keep up with was remarkable for me. I'm getting old. I'll tell just one quick story, because Tia mentioned that she had worked with Amy years ago, and she volunteered covering the Republican National Convention around the time that Democracy Now!, which is Amy's show, was going to television. And Jeremy Scahill, who was a correspondent on Democracy Now! And is a journalist, knew Tia and convinced her to come down and volunteer, because they were trying to bring in people with some experience on the ground. And, there's nobody better at writing and gunning than Tia Lessin. She was with Michael Moore for years, confronting folks. So, she finds herself, overnight with a camera in hand and a credential at the Republican National Convention, nominating convention for George W. Bush. And she's off with Amy. And Amy spots George H.W. Bush coming down an escalator So they run over there, and he comes down the escalator, and Amy asks him the question that we all want to know, right? What do you say to people who say that you're a war criminal?
For the invasion, for the
invasion of Iraq. Yeah. And he gives an answer, and then Tia, horrified, looks at the camera and realizes that the audio wasn't connected. And she has to tell Amy Goodman, a radio legend at the time, I didn't get the audio. And Amy looked at her and said, well, let's do it again. And they chased him down and got him at the next turn. She asked him the same question. He gave the same answer, and it went on the air, and everything was good. So there's a version of practical persistence and vision, in the field. No, but what I'd also say is, I think all of us make these films because we want to be. Some people make art for friendship, and we all hopefully make it to learn, and to be impacted by the stories that we're trying to tell. It sort of defines what Amy does. Amy is the most incredible listener that you'll ever find. That's Amy's real secret weapon. She is unstoppable, but she listens to people, and she wants to give people a chance to be heard by the rest of us. And so, if we want to learn from what we do, I would say that one of the things that we learned the most is how important it is to listen to what people are telling you, to not bring your preconceived notions fully baked to the table when you're making a film, and just be impacted by what's happening in front of you.
Thank you so much. I just want to wrap up. I just want to say these are 3 incredible films about what I think of as heroes for our time. And one of the takeaways from each of the films is that even though they are all facing incredibly difficult issues, important issues, they are all very uplifting films. And so I really value that affect in the films as well, and very inspiring. And so thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.